Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HistoryDAO Decentralized Discourse. My name is Sky Harris. I'm CEO and co-founder of HistoryDAO, and I'll be hosting the conversation today with a very special guest who is surely well known to all of you. He is founding editor and senior maverick of Wired magazine, as well as an Olympic-class oracle on the subject of how technology will impact our future. So, of course, I'm speaking of none other than Kevin Kelly. HistoryDAO is a huge fan of Mr. Kelly because of his seminal role in the history of the internet, the history of technology, and the history of the future. So thanks for joining me, Kevin Kelly.
Hey, my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I look forward to this.
Awesome. All right. Then if you're ready, let's begin.
Sure.
Okay. So I kind of wanted to start with maybe a little bit of like a test or a bit of a challenge to your very well established, well-known optimism regarding subject of technological development. So I guess maybe let me sort of put it this way. The rise and fall of great civilizations seems to correlate with the advent of various technologies. Technologies for communicating, for building, for planting, healing, killing, for transporting, for calculating, and maybe now even for thinking itself with the rise of AI. So considering the level of disruption potential that AI represents, would you say as a techno-optimist that it is actually automatically a good thing because it is a kind of technology? Or what is the inherent good in such a technology as AI?
That's a very profound question. In a certain sense, the question you're asking, which is very allied, is, are all new technologies inherently a good, a positive? Or is there something about a new technology that we should try and reject it from the beginning? I think I would side on the. I would side with the idea that until proven guilty, I would say most technologies we have to assume from our past history and experience are positive in the net. And by positive in the net, I'm not talking about a very big difference. I think that if a technology can create just 1% more good than bad, that it's worth doing because of compounding interest, because 1% compounded over years and decades is very powerful. So I have a very low bar in a certain sense for what's a positive calculus on technology. So I would say if we can show that a technology is 1% better than it's bad, then that's a net good, and we proceed. And I would further say that we can't tell that in the beginning. We can't measure that difference from the start. We can't think about it and figure it out. The only way to determine that is we have to actually use it and try it and live with it and have the data from it. And that if after that we decide that there isn't even that 1%, then we can do something about it. And thirdly, in our experience so far, that doing something about it, what that mostly means is giving it a different job. Ideas are kind of weird. You can't really forget an idea or undo an idea or eliminate an idea. And technologies are just ideas made concrete. And so technologies don't really disappear, but we can give them new jobs. And a famous example of that is DDT, the insecticide, which was used at a massive scale to spray on plantations, and it had massive repercussions on the environment. But it turned out that if you judiciously spray DDT around households, it saved hundreds of millions of human lives a year from anti-malarial effects from basically stopping malaria, and it had very minimal impact on the natural environment. So that was like finding a new job for the same technology. So I would say, coming back then to your question about some of these new technologies, is first of all, they're innocent until proven guilty, and secondly, we just don't have enough time for most of them to really decide on their value. And then thirdly, if we do decide that some of them are not quite doing what we want, we can find new jobs for them.
Great. Yeah. There's one part that I wanted to key on a little bit, in that, you mentioned that these technologies are innocent until proven guilty. I think one thing you mentioned was that sometimes these technologies that are proven guilty eventually can have different use cases. And you mentioned how ideas kind of stick around. You can't really like eliminate them; they just are.
Right.
I want to know kind of like what the battleground looks like before then. Like, how does it look with these? People battling out? Is it journalism's job to battle and decide in a court, or a court of the people decide whether these technologies are overwhelmingly bad or do more bad than they do good? Or is this something that say science is supposed to do, and the scientific process is supposed to go through?
I think as much as possible, we should have evidence-based policy. We should base things on evidence. Journalists are not necessarily the best to gather that. They're good to report that. Otherwise, they tend to report on anecdotes, which we both understand is not necessarily the kind of evidence we need. But having evidence-based studies, science basically, will tell us. And it's hard to do. We should be doing more of it. And another important point is that we should do it constantly. So the FDA is sort of a weird holdover from a previous era, the industrial era, is when you do things in batches. So the FDA will approve a drug, and once it's approved, it's like it's approved. Well, we learn more about the drug once we started giving it to a lot of people. So that approval process should be a continuous, ongoing process. It shouldn't be as laborious as the first time, but there should be a sense in which we're constantly vigilant and rechecking to see whether we have anything new, whether there's new evidence, whether we should change our mind about it. And so there should be this kind of ongoing process of evaluating the technology in a scientific way the whole time, all the time. And so that's a big project. That's a lot of money. That's expensive, but I think we can afford it. And I think that's there'll be many spin-offs from that. And there's a larger discussion about how we do science and how that itself is changing and needs to change. In some cases, it needs to speed up. And how do we do that? And there's some ideas. But I think that should be a scientific enterprise, so we don't fool ourselves. Journalists can be involved in communicating that, but it should be done in a scientific way.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, and I think perhaps a general consensus is somewhat informed by the scientific process, but may also take some notes or some ideas from I guess some other fields of knowledge. So perhaps there's going to be kind of a deeper battleground past just the scientific process, or do you think it should be strictly scientifically?
I think it should be evidence-based, is all I'm saying. Evidence can come from everywhere. Certainly there's evidence in anecdotes, but it has to be considered in the context. And I think, it's when I say scientific, it doesn't, sociology, how people react, how people feel, they count. It's just that we need to measure these in a scientific way. Right now, a lot of our policy about technologies are based on what we imagine they might do. So it's all hypothetical. It's often very third person oriented, meaning we're not thinking about what's actually happened to us. We're thinking about what could possibly happen to somebody else. And so it's fantasy, basically. It's science fiction, it's speculation, which has a role, but it shouldn't really play that much of a role in making policy. So that's the issue right now, is that we tend to want to make policy based on sort of the worst possible things that we could imagine that might happen. That's not a good way.
Got it. Well, maybe let me switch tracks just a little bit and go back to something you said previously in your first response, talking about sort of like the 51% to 49% split, and how that's sort of, a net good for this technology, or, as a reason to incorporate or keep this technology in the form that it is, or perhaps, with some adaptations and changes. I guess maybe I want to analyze your optimism a little further, just because you're, optimistic about something, and people in general, I mean, just because someone's optimistic about something doesn't mean that you should only see the good side, right? It seems more reasonable to have a grasp and understanding of both the good and the bad. But perhaps in the case of the optimist, the difference is that you see the good outweighing the bad. Is that sort of a fair assumption?
Well,
and
yes,
if it is,
so there's two
yes,
things. I think one is I see the good outweighing the bad by a little tiny bit. And secondly, the bad, the problems, I embrace. As an optimist, I embrace the problems because the problems are actually what propels progress. The problems are opportunities disguised as problems. They open up new territories. And what we get out of all this, you think, okay, 41%, 51, 49%. It's like, that sounds like a wash. That sounds like break even. We're not really going anywhere. Well, here's the thing. Here's what you get out of all that. It isn't just the tiny 1% net gain. What we are getting is increased choices and possibilities. And that's why problems themselves are not to be sneered at or denied, or in some ways even necessarily trying to minimize. It's because they themselves are bringing forth and forcing us to come up with possibilities that did not exist before. And so I think the kind of optimist that I want to be is one that fully acknowledges and uses problems, faces problems and uses problems as a way to steer what we're doing and to increase this expansion of possibilities. And so yes, I think it's partly because I think they're overwhelmed by a tiny bit, but more importantly, problems are essential to the forward march of progress.
Let me kind of root it back to AI then, more specifically, and just along the same line. What then, like, were these problems you're describing, obviously, that are maybe not inherent, but either inherent or an effect of these emerging technologies? What are the negatives attending cutting edge technologies like AI? What are these downsides? What are these problems that AI is facing that could be potential, I guess, learning experiences, for lack of a better term?
Yeah. So AI, it's good that we're talking about AI, and because from our limited history, I suspect, and others, that AI is probably one of the most powerful technologies that we have ever invented, and will, over the long term, will really basically alter everything that we do. In our short experience, powerful technologies will be powerfully abused. Okay, the more powerful ways it's going to come and bite us. And so there is no doubt in my mind that some of the biggest problems in the future will be coming from AI. I also believe that most of the greatest benefits will be coming from it. I think there's a pretty good chance that those benefits will outweigh those problems by a little bit. But nonetheless, some of the biggest, deepest, gnarliest, difficult problems in the future will be coming from AI. And we humans, particularly us humans in the year 2022, are very good about thinking about all the bad ways in which AI could harm us, and that's just generally true throughout history. It's just always easier to imagine how things break than it is to how they get better. That's why entrepreneurs and other people are rightly honored, because it is much harder to invent something new that works rather than to imagine how something that already exists could break. And so we have a challenge, and the challenge is our heads are filled with a lot more pictures of how this goes wrong than how it goes right. It's much easier for us to imagine the ways in which we could hypothetically have disasters than we could imagining all the good ways that this could assist us. I see it as my job and the job of other people to try and bring forth some of those positive visions to counterbalance the fact that most of the visions we have of AI are dystopian. And so that's one thing. Is I would say a second thing about this is that, having said all that, and the difficulty of imagining what it is that there has never been a technology in our history where we have thought about it as much before it actually exists. All right. I mean, the number of conferences, the number of full-time people thinking about AI safety and alignment, it's just, there's billions of dollars being spent on thinking about something that does not exist yet and what we can do. That's never happened before. So some of that thinking about it is useful and good. Some of it is probably misspent, but of course, it's very hard to tell right now which half is which. So I'm all for thinking ahead about the consequences and the unintended consequences as best we can. But we also have to acknowledge, and this is one of my important points, is that these complicated technologies like AI and others, genetics and even minor things, are so complicated that we can't really tell what they're good for until we actually use them. That it's only through use that we're going to figure out their actual honest, genuine dynamics, where they actually good. And we can think about this a lot, but this is what I call thinkism. This is the idea that thinking about things will solve problems. Thinking is not sufficient. Thinking alone is not sufficient. It has to be put together with experiments. It has to be put together with actual prototypes. It has to be with actual years and years of use before we'll actually know. So we can only do so much by thinking about things and thinking about their future and their consequences. Most of what we're going to understand about technology is going to be coming through the actual use. And that's where, again, data comes in. So there is a good sense in which we want to think about AI and have discussions like we are right now. But we also don't want to lose sight that we want to kind of come back to the data. What does the data show right now so far? And to give you one example, and this is a challenge that I will go out to any watchers and listeners out there, and that is to my knowledge, not a single human has lost their job because of AI to date. Okay, it's like if you say, all right, we talk about AI replacing humans. Let's talk about the data. Where is the data so far? There's a lot of AI so far. Where is the data of people losing their jobs? And as far as I can tell, there's not been a single human fired because of AI. So, all right, let's start there. So that's where we are with AI. So there's a lot to say, but let's also try and go back to the data whenever we can.
Sure, I really like that take, and I think one thing you mentioned about us more easily being able to think about or anticipate the problems inherent in some of these new technologies, or compared to like the positives that can be inherent in these technologies, it's harder to understand what net positives will come. Is it the job of inventors engineers, research and development teams to basically go and explore and discover what the possibilities are for these new technologies are? And then does that get passed on to, the general population, the general consumers, to kind of like test it out and figure out how that works over time? Or how does that split kind of work in your mind?
Well, yeah, you're right in a certain sense. If we think about the ecosystem of what I call the technium, which is the system of all technologies. Technologies don't stand alone. AI exists because chip manufacturers are making these graphic GPUs at mass scale. There's software, there's electricity, which has to be generated to support them at massive scale. There is a lot of technologies that are all interdependent. So it takes a computer these days to make electricity. It takes electricity to make a computer, and so forth. So there's a lot of people involved in what we do next. And besides the actual computer scientists and AI, there are users, and users are part of that system. And how they respond to something, whether they like it or don't, whether they're outraged by it, that matters. And they're a part of this system in terms of where we go with this as a society. If most humans on Earth are unimpressed with AI, okay, so it doesn't get used. But if, how it affects people, how it changes what they do, how it changes what they think about themselves matters. And one of the things that we also know from history is that a lot of these technologies are inevitable at the large scale, at the large view, meaning that AI is coming. We can't really stop that as long as we keep making more stuff. But the character of the AI, who owns it, who controls it, who's accountable, do we own it? Do we have control? Who, what rights do we have? What responsibilities do we have? These are all things that we have a lot of choice about and that matter to us. And so kind of in addition, or on top of the kind of technological progression of AI coming, we still have a tremendous amount of choice as a society to shape the character of the AI. Is it regulated or not? Who regulates it? Is it national or global? Are there, it can even be regulated locally or not? So there's tons of decisions that we have as the collective group, from being consumers to researchers in other fields to users. And we have some influence, either directly or indirectly, on where this goes. So even though AI is technologically inevitable, the character of that AI is really up to us.
Is there an example from history, from past technological innovations, that could be considered with a similar scope and scale to the impact that AI is having on our times now?
I think language.
Are there lessons to be learned, basically, from our past experience?
I think AI its effect is not just like industrialization, although there is many similarities of inventing artificial power, steam power, and then later on, oil power, nuclear power. That was by far the big. I think that was the second biggest impact on us. The first was actually language. When we invented language, we moved from no language to language. That was the main thing that created us as humans, was the fact that we had this tool called language. And it's so fundamental to us that we can't even imagine us before that. So I think language was the first. Industrialization and artificial power was the second. And I think this third one of artificial AI is going to be closer to the invention of language in terms of its actual scale of impact than even industrialization was. And because it's really infinite in its possible possibilities of change and directions. And so, and so, in some ways we could say industrialization kind of has already completed. Anything that we can possibly automate in terms of power has been automated, but it's hard to see how we even could complete an AI thing, because we can always imagine things being smarter than they are, and in having more varieties of minds. So I think the space of possible minds is very, very, very large. And that's basically what we're going to be doing. The greatest, I think, mistake in our language is talking about AI as a singularity, as a single thing, like the AI or AI, as if it's one thing. It's like the ocean. No, it's like there are going to be thousands, if not millions, of species of AIs and different kinds of minds engineered to do different things. And very few of them will be like humans, because we don't need more human minds. We just need more different kinds of minds. And there are some problems in science and business, even in government, that I think a human mind alone is not sufficient to solve. So part of what we're doing is we're making these other kinds of minds to help us solve problems like, maybe it's dark energy or quantum gravity or something that we may not be able to actually figure out on our own. But working with these artificial minds of various kinds, we may be able to solve some of those problems and have an understanding. The understanding will rest not just in our minds, but in that kind of partnership mind. In other words, a human, we may not fully understand it ourselves, but with the system, we can understand it enough to do stuff. And so I think that's where we're headed. That's a very big, strange new world where we have multiple kinds of sentience. For so long, we are arriving, we've been the only one with a huge gap between us and even primates. And living in a world where there's many different kinds of minds is one of the, are going to psychologically, one of the biggest difficulties that we're having right now.
Yeah, I remember from your book just a real long list of possible types of AI combinations, AI human combinations, AI combinations, the kind of different like layers that are possible there. And I thought that was really fascinating. So for our audience, if you haven't yet, definitely go and check out Mr. Kelly's book, The Inevitable. Some great pieces in there. I think there's something sort of disrupting the AI world and the art world simultaneously right now that a lot of people are talking about, that I sort of wanted to get into a bit. And perhaps for you may have seen this coming, you and colleagues or experts like you, but I think for a lot of us, we didn't really understand the impacts that AI art would sort of have on our consciousness. Yeah. Or the public discourse recently. So, with the art world being so emphatically concerned with provenance and pedigree and authenticity, this is in part because fakes and replications are ubiquitous in art. What does AI bring to the table considering that? With AI art, can AI art be considered authentic and original? Like what's going on right now with this?
Right. So both of us are referring to this explosion in this past year of many, many, many engines that produce, that generate art images from a database, and they're guided by a human prompt, a language prompt. So they took an image generating engine that had been around for a while, and they took a language models and they married them together, and they had a system where you could give some English words or any kind of human language words to the engine, and it would paint, it would imagine what you're trying to say based on the fact that it had digested 63 billion human images with captions. And the results are very stunning and bowl over most people when they first encounter them. And they raise all kinds of questions. So one of the questions is, well, is it art? Is it creative? it's so good that maybe human artists don't have a job anymore. There's questions about who owns the actual art. Is it the algorithm and the services that are hosting it? Is it the creator? What about the people whose images and work are in the database that was used to train it? Do they have any rights? And then how do you track it, and is it worth trying to unravel that? And there are other questions about if you make variations of that thing, does that count? Is that authentic? And then you mentioned provenance, which is keeping track of where all this stuff comes from. And then can you use it to fake? Is this another tool for deep fakes where you are creating something to try and fool a human? Because it looks like it could be done much better. So the answer to all these is we don't know, right? I mean, it's just like, yes, these are really good questions. We're going to sort them out, and right now we can think of it. Many people have many opinions about it, including me. But the honest answer is that it's going to take some while to actually have people use them, which they are using them. There's right now, by my calculation, there's 20 million images a day being generated by the four main. Wow. 20 million new, amazing, never before seen pieces of art, photographs being generated every day. So we're beginning to have some feeling about that. And I think I'm paying attention to this because I think that this is a rehearsal for the other, what we're doing now and what we're going through. We're basically going to rehearse what happens as AI enters into the rest of our lives. Because it's not just, right now, it's still images. Within the last 2 weeks, it's now 3D images, and moving into videos, and then into the metaverse where you have spatial things. And so that's where the superpower really is unleashed. It's not making little pictures and photographs. It's being able to fill out all the details of a world just with a prompt. And so that's a big thing. But the bigger thing is the fact that this is, again, just a rehearsal for the other ways in which music will be done, and code. There's a GitHub Copilot where these AIs can suggest and generate code based on, again, on the code that other people write, and they can fill out autocomplete. Eventually, you give it a little prompt, say, "This is what I want," and it's writing code for you. And it's it's not as good as the professionals, but it's better than most average amateurs. And so code, and then there's design. I mean, so anyway, the reason why I'm paying attention to these image generators is I see them as canaries for what's going to be coming in the future. And I think that we have a tech hype cycle, or a tech panic cycle, maybe I should call it, where we keep rehearsing through these levels of panic when these new technologies come along. There's these stages that people are kind of freaked out by. And we need to kind of, I'm trying to help us identify it, say, no, this is just a panic cycle. Don't worry. We're going to go through it right now. Right now, it's like people are kind of really frazzled by the fact that this is working, and they don't want it to work so well, or they want it stopped. And the next stage is they're going to say, well, actually, it works so well that everybody doesn't have access to it. You have to make sure everybody has access to it. It's unevenly distributed. And so anyway, there's phases that people kind of go through in their panic. And we just have to learn that this is part of the cycle of new technologies. So AI image generators are a thing. I think they're going to be two things. I would say they're mostly going to be used for making images where no images exist right now. It's not like they're going to replace most art. They're going to be moving into places where art hasn't gone before. They're so cheap that we're going to use them where we wouldn't normally use them. So in the past, we might have to find something and we can't find exactly thing. We're not going to hire an artist to do it. So we leave it blank. Now we can fill it up. We can have art that's made contextually to what we're saying. We could have respond to our moods. So these are all places where we don't do art now. So now we can do art. And then secondly, it requires a human working with the AI to actually generate really great art. And this is the surprise that people are finding, the prompt artists, the prompting is an art in itself. The really great images that you see are the result of 50 steps, maybe hundreds of hours of people working. And so there are people who are better at this than others. And so the very prompting is the new art. It's like being a director. You're directing, you're just prompting different people. And here you have AIs working for you. And so you are directing the image. And that is the new art form. And it's a partnership with it. It's not like just pressing a button on the camera. You have to kind of work at this. And so this is the new art, and a human will be, for most of the great stuff, a partner. For the other kind of stuff, the lowercase creativity, the mundane stuff, it'll be more automatic. And that's good too, because we want novelty and innovation and creativity. So we now have a synthetic creativity, which doesn't need intelligence. That's the surprise, is that we can have artificial creativity without having consciousness or intelligence. It's a much more elemental force that we can package and generate and engineer, and we can put into systems. So this synthetic creativity, that's the surprise that people say, well, this stuff is creative. And that's very useful to us. And so that's a new thing. And now we're kind of practicing our absorption of this with the AI generators, because it's going to come in the other AI systems as well.
So perhaps, artist programmer will be a viable occupation in the future.
Yeah, prompters. There's prompt books. There's a prompt marketplace where people can buy and sell prompts, because they're often very hard to come up with. There are prompt whisperers who, like magicians, can just tease out things that other people say, how did you do that? I worked for hours and I couldn't get anything like that, because they spent 10,000 hours working with these things. There'll be ones who specialize in different ones. And so, yes, the prompters are going to be a new kind of artist.
You mentioned something earlier on in your response about this sort of emergence of AI art, and lots of questions about copyright and authenticity and provenance, and trying to track those things and get a better grasp on those things. I wonder, if we have a set of, more clear guidelines or regulations in place, or laws for, deciphering who is attributed or what is attributed the copyright on something, I want to get your thoughts on whether or not NFT and blockchain technology can be the digital identifier for those digital works, and whether that's a viable option, or if there's other options that, are more viable.
Yeah. You're in a very fast-moving arena with crypto, and we're still figuring out, I think, what crypto is good for or not. Again, I can kind of sit home and imagine all kinds of things that it might be good for, but it's going to be, the street is going to determine what actually happens. I think there are certain things that we're trying to use crypto for that it may not be suited for. We might be able to do with other kind of tools, including tools that haven't been invented yet. But I think the idea of having an encrypted chain, like a blockchain, is a very fundamental, genius, brilliant idea. Again, part of the issue with crypto is that the real attributes and its real jobs are being obscured by the incredible amounts of money that are swirling around that really disguise to my mind, to the first approximation, most of the use cases revolve around money in some sort.
Sure.
If you say, well, I'm going to talk about crypto, but I'm not going to talk about money, I have to tell you that's a very short conversation. Okay. So one of those possibilities that aren't money is like ID, having a decentralized way to do ID, tracking the authenticity of something, say in a metaverse where you want to have a distributed metaverse that has interoperability, and you want to be able to move something and have it appear in more than one place. You can kind of imagine using blockchain to ensure that it really belongs there and it's authentic and etc. But it also might be that that's too cumbersome, and maybe there are better ways, or maybe it's semi-centralized. So I don't know. I don't know enough about crypto, and I don't know enough about the actual real world difficulties of trying to ensure that. But I'm open to that possibility that this could be a job for crypto. I suspect that most of these non-monetary jobs are going to first be played out in the metaverse, in games and metaverses, where you want to have digital assets and you want to track them and you want them to be persistent and etc. And so I think that's where I'm guessing that is. And I think, of course, I think that the metaverse is the next big thing after phones. I think smart glasses come after smartphones. So it's not so this is not a trivial thing. I mean, I think this is not just about gaming as we know it today. I think that I think Zuckerberg is right in one sense, that I think that is the future. I think he's wrong and probably in the timing of it, because I think it's many years away. But I think that is where we're moving, and I can certainly imagine crypto having a role in trying to organize this in a decentralized way, which is what we want. But I'm also open to the possibility that it's too expensive or doesn't scale, whatever it is. And so that's possible too. And maybe there's some hybrid versions of it. I just don't know enough about it.
Got it. Thank you for that extensive response. And I guess maybe let's switch track a little bit past NFTs and past crypto. Talking a little bit about the rise of AI creating a useless class. And this is something, Yuval Noah Harari in Homo Deus argues that it's sort of inevitable that a non-productive class that can't be employed will rise through these technological innovations, especially with AI. I got to say, there's some compelling sides to this argument. What do you think is perhaps the fate of human productivity in light of the productive potential of technology? And do humans have purpose without it? Is existence alone a sufficient humanly compelling purpose?
Yeah, I haven't read his Deus book, so I don't know the details of it. But of course, it's not a new argument. I think it's very misguided because I think what we as humans want to do is basically we want to do the unproductive things. I like to say that productivity is for robots and AIs. If there's anything that we want done that can be measured in a productivity way, that's a job for AI and robots. All the things that I notice that humans want to spend their day doing are things that where productivity doesn't matter. They want to paint all day. Like Picasso, no one's measuring how many paintings per day or square inches of paint Picasso is putting in. What he wants to do is he wants to do like one better painting a day, or even once in a while than mediocre. He wants to improve the quality of his paintings. Science is fundamentally and inherently an inefficient process because you are making mistakes, you're having failure. Exploration, by definition means dead ends and disasters and backtracking. Art, well, and even the small things of having a dinner and small talk, that's not efficient, that's not productive. So my point is that what happens when we give to the robots this, it's like the useless stuff is what we're here for. That's the goal. The goal is to be creative. I mean, that's what we want, because we all want, we don't want the AI so that we can be more productive. We want it so that we don't have to work on the things where productivity matters. We want to be creative and inefficient in a certain sense, thinking about things that have never been thought before, doing things that don't have a name, trying stuff that can't be measured. That's what we want the technology and the technium to support us in, is that we want to get away from that usefulness, and we want to head directly into becoming as useless as possible.
That's a really interesting take. I like that a lot. And I will strive to be as useless as possible.
Cool and useless is my definition of art. Cool and useless. That means it's art.
Well, I really like that take. Well, Mr. Kelly, I just wanted to have, maybe one final follow-up question as we
Sure.
get up the hour here. What are the kind of things that you enjoy doing that, can be put under this useless umbrella? What are these kind of things that, make us be human and feel human? What can people spend their time on that, AI isn't going to do for us? If AI can take care of the productivity and the day of work, then what does it can do to really feel alive?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I just am completing a book of a little book of excellent advice that I have been working on, and Viking Penguin will be releasing in May, a little bigger size. And one of my advices is, like, again, don't try to structure your day so that you're going through your jobs as fast as possible. That's the productivity. Actually, try to construct your job so you're working on something that you never want to stop working on. You want to spend as much time as possible. That's what you want to aim your day for, is not to reduce the to be more efficient in the things, is to spend as much time as possible on things that you want to do. And what should those be? Well, again, I hinted a little bit. I think I always recommend that you try, and if at all possible, that you try and work on something that's the head of the language, where there's not a name for what you're doing, where you find it very hard to describe in words what it is, because that is where the future is headed towards. It's the thing that didn't exist before, that we don't even have words for. That's the really great thing. I mean, if you ask most people today what their occupation they would make no sense to someone 100 years ago. What's a web designer? What is that? What's a life coach? What's a yoga teacher? It's like, so you want to be working on things that we don't really have names, where we don't know very much about. That's a really very rewarding place. Even if you fail there, you will probably be ahead of everybody else. And I like to spend my time in a couple of things. One is I just finished a piece for Wired on these image generators. Just literally sent it this afternoon, the final thing. And I spent 6 months working on it. And I spent 6 months researching it, interviewing, and writing, as a way to force me to think about it. Because like you and everybody else, it's like, I see these things, like, what does that mean? Where is it going? Should I be concerned, and should I be exuberant? What should I make of it? And for me, the only way to do that is to try and write about it. So for me, writing is a type of thinking. And I'll then share my book report to other people when I'm at the end. But it forces me to think. And so I like to try and be useful. And I see my job here on Earth as trying to articulate a positive view, a future that we would like to live in, a future that I would like to live in. So what I'm working on and what I'm spending my time thinking about and will increasingly try to write or convey in some way, maybe I'm using digital imaging, maybe, is a picture of a future with high tech and all this technology that is a future that I would say, yeah, I can't, I wish I could live that long to live there. That's a future that I want to be in. And I think that that's where my optimism is operating, because I think unless we can have a picture of that, it's going to be very hard to kind of arrive there accidentally, inadvertently. I mean, this kind of stuff is so complicated that it doesn't make sense that we're just going to stumble into it accidentally. It's much better if we have a vision of what we're aiming for, like, you know, like the vision of in Star Trek with those communicators. Most of the people who made the iPhone had that in mind. They were aiming at that communicator, just like I'm sure there's people who are aiming at, you know, the transporter, whatever that was, the beam me up, Scotty. That's something that people will work on for many, many years. And so I think having a picture of where we would like to go is really, really helpful in getting there. And that's something that I'm working on.
Well, Mr. Kelly, thank you very much for your extensive responses today and your awesome insights as always. And we really, really appreciate having you on for the HistoryDAO Decentralized Discourse. We love having you on again. So I just wanted to ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to bring up.
Yes, actually, could you take 1 minute and describe the HistoryDAO to me in, you know, the briefest elevator pitch you can manage?
Got it. That I can do. So HistoryDAO is where the world records history and current events in Web3. So we've seen that there's pretty obvious flaws in the business models with the current news cycle and news publications. And we see that, you know, sort of like clickbait business models where inflammatory information or news gets the most revenue or the most advertising dollars is a pretty big problem. And we think that having user-generated content via history NFTs, which upload text, headlines, articles, images, videos, you know, eyewitness video, eyewitness audio, for example. Those are all things that users can record across the world as events are unfolding as they happen and mint them on the blockchain as history NFTs. So that's what we're trying to do here. And we're trying to think of, you know, what the news cycle and what history looks like in the future in blockchain, NFT technology and Web3.
And is the idea of putting them onto blockchains primarily to, is it, you know, to ensure like kind of like a date stamp, or is it to make them fungible or non-fungible in terms of being able to be sold or cataloged? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people are driven by economic incentives. And so that is one piece of the pie. Yeah, definitely users are able to, you know, buy, sell, and trade history NFTs, as well as, you know, the users that create the best content through the DAO structure will have the content voted up to, you know, the top of the platform, which will make them more valuable inherently. So it's up to the community to sort of like sort out by themselves what they think quality content is. And then people can get rewarded for creating content, basically recording the news cycle across the world. I'd say the other side of it is that there is, you know, countless examples of historical documents being lost forever. And with blockchain technology, the decentralized, indelible nature of blockchain technology, we were looking to solve that pain point as well.
But are you putting accounts right onto the chain, or are they just linking like an NFT does?
So, sorry, what was the?
Are you actually putting the report or the historical account onto the chain itself, or are they just pointing to them off chain like an NFT usually does?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's, you know, several layers to it, you know, as far as, you know, speed goes, having some element that's centralized in a database is a little bit quicker. But I think as a project evolves over time, you know, the most authentic and the most on-chain transparent data is going to really behoove us to go in that direction.
Okay, so you would like to aim to putting all history onto the chain itself, the full account.
Yeah.
And you say it's a DAO. So is it this group that's doing this, is it operating as a DAO right now?
Still in the early stages, but yes, we're starting to implement those features.
And what has surprised you about trying to run something with a DAO?
What has surprised me is, and this is something you mentioned in your book as well, is how willing users are to organize, to manage, to create, to do things, even without financial incentives. So, if it's something someone is spirited about or passionate about, they're really gung ho about it. And you see a lot of really involved community members just, for the sake of their passion, for the sake of the idea, for the sake of, recording history in Web3.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's really wonderful. Thank you for letting me know. I'm really glad that you guys are there working on your thing. I'm always, the idea of a DAO itself is a very broad idea. And I know there's many different iterations and instances of how people are trying to manage that. I'd love if some of them would be wildly successful. So I hope yours is one of them.
Thank you very much. We hope so too.
All righty.
All right. Thanks so much for your time today, Mr. Kelly. And what's the name of your book coming up in May?
Yeah, it's called Excellent Advice for a Living. There's 450 little bits, somewhat similar to the ones I posted a couple of years ago on my birthday. They're tweets, basically. Like I was suggesting, try to work on something that doesn't have a name. Or one of my favorites for people is don't be the best, be the only. And so part of what I think most people should be trying to work on is to find out, and it's very hard to find out, what your particular mix of talents are, because your own background and genetics have produced something that is unique. And if you can find something that you're the only one doing, you don't need a resume. So not everybody can get there, and sometimes it takes most of your life, but you kind of wind up doing something that only you can do. And that's really the sweet spot. And it can be all kinds of things. But if you can kind of aim your life in that direction, I think that's what the world needs.
A fantastic point to end on. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly, for your time today.
Thank you for your great questions.
Sure. We'll hopefully see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.